So that's me. That's me when we used to be in more of a physical kind of space. Just to kind of give you a little bit of context, right? I've been doing this stuff. Been in IT for a long time. I was an architect and an engineer on trading platforms for a while. I was an architect at Red Hat. For the last, I guess seven years now, I've been doing what Dan alluded to was really helping organizations learn to learn. And it sounds silly, but what I think you realize is that a lot of organizations don't think that they need to learn, but it's a gap. And so I've been helping organizations do that for a while. I tend not to do it by telling people things. I tend to do it by working with teams and experiencing things, and that seems to be helping. So in this talk, we'll talk around how to help organizations learn, along with some ideas on how you can get going on it. I would be remiss if I didn't mention this gentleman right here. This gentleman's David Hussman. I bring him up because he was a dear friend that I learned a lot from. Professionally, personally, I learned a lot from this gentleman. And so, look, if nothing else, if I'm not that interesting, I would suggest you look up this gentleman, David Hussman. He passed away a few years ago, but he's had a big influence on a lot of people. And if nothing else, this is my acknowledgement that I've needed to learn from people, and he was one of the big influences for me. So, without further ado, let's talk about our current world, our big fun world of building products in technology. So I'm sure this relates to a lot of people on the call here. Dr. Deming put this wonderfully years ago. Organizations are looking for transformation. Everybody wants to be better. Everybody wants to be different. Everybody wants to be the next Netflix or Spotify or the next big startup. But for a lot of organizations, they expect quick results. They think if we just do what other companies did, then we will get wildly successful. If we just copy what's the process that somebody else did, or if we just, everybody's doing microservices, that's the cool thing to do. So if we just did microservices, then therefore we'd be successful. As I'm sure you're all well aware, those types of organizations are doomed to disappointment, right? Copying things and just trying to look for the quick wins and not actually investing in these things and investing in new ways of looking at the world isn't the way to become a better organization. Even that word transformation is kind of silly. Transformation assumes that today you're one thing and tomorrow you're the next, and therefore you're done. We live in a world that there is no sense of done. You build products, you all build products. They're never done. They're either abandoned or they're retired. They're never done. You're always helping, you're always enhancing them, learning more about them, how to make them better. So this idea of completeness or transformation or end state, it doesn't exist. So we have to acknowledge that in our world. We live in a complex world. Your systems, the systems we all build and support, are vast, and they're distributed, and they're not easy. And this leads to different types of situations. We can't understand them in simple ways. The interactions amongst systems have ripple effects. Taking that a step further, the systems you all build are complex in that they interact with people, and it turns out people are pretty complex. Take that a step further, and we're building things that have never been built before. It's not like we are just building another wheel over and over again. It's not like a solved problem. We're all solving problems in creative spaces in new ways that have never been done. And on top of that, and especially at DevOps days, we're building new ideas on top of products and tools that have just been built themselves. So today's world is different. It is just simply different. It's complex. It's complex. There's other things going on, and it's creative and constantly evolving. And sometimes we try to think that we can apply certainty to this type of world. We'd like to think that there's one way to solve this problem. The problem's never been solved before, but surely there's one way. And if I just look hard enough, I'll find the one way to do things. We can't use these types of perspectives in this type of complex, dynamic world where we're constantly learning new things. We can't say there's one thing. Even this idea of best practices doesn't necessarily fit because the context is always different. And of course, we can't assume certainty in this world of complexity. We can't say that, we can't guarantee that this thing will be done on a certain time or done a certain way. We can't guarantee that that process that worked for Netflix is going to work for us. We just can't assume all of these things, and so we can't cherry pick and just replicate other success. It turns out we actually have to learn things. In today's world, knowledge itself is shifting. And so if you think about the things that are happening in our world and the things we need to learn, there are things that could possibly be done explicitly. We could explain somebody the steps to set up a password or set up two-factor authentication. It's easier to explain. We could write it down. I could hand you a piece of paper. You could probably understand it and it would work for you. But then there's all this other stuff, like the chunkier, meatier stuff that we do day to day. That's more of a tacit knowledge, right? Things that we experienced and we've personally made part of our knowledge in our vocabulary, in our lexicon, and we know how to do these things, but they're hard to explain. How do you debug the Kubernetes cluster when you get certain kinds of errors? Some of it you might be able to write down, but a lot of it's based upon experience. And even then, even if it's based upon experience, it's hard to verbalize or hard to share. And just because you told somebody doesn't mean they understood it. So we live in a complex world. We're building things new all the time. Knowledge is different. We need to have a different approach to the world. Luckily, the approach is simply just about learning better. So let's get a little bit. So we need to learn better, but we need to be able to learn in a complex domain where things are constantly being created and knowledge is harder to translate or to provide to other people. Here's a current challenge, is that we can no longer learn in isolation. Meaning that, look, we're at DevOps days, and if you think about how you go about delivering products to your customers and values to your customers, in a lot of organizations, the DevOps people tend to sit more on the right side of this value stream. They tend to sit more on the product delivery side of things, where we're trying to minimize variability. We want to have, one way we deploy things. We want predictability, but even then that's kind of hard because it's hard to get predictability on how systems will interact. But on the left side of things, we have all this, how do you find the right thing to build before you build it the right way? And in that space, we need to have lots of different ideas, and we definitely can't have consistency or predictability because we don't know when we will find the right idea. So we have to do a lot of experimentation. But if we don't understand how to learn across this value stream, then we just start optimizing parts of it at the sake of the whole. And even then, it might not make as much sense. If we're just getting really good at deploying things, but it's not helping us learn the right thing to deploy, we're cutting off our opportunities to learn. So we need to learn kind of wider in this value stream. We need to learn more contextually. And all organizations are facing this kind of challenge. So given this need to learn, what do we do about it as an organization? Some organizations will say, we invest a lot of time for our people to be trained. They'll be upskilled. Well, you could, and that's a good idea, but it can't be lip service, right? People have to be able to learn continuously and contextually, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But learning needs to become fundamental to a lot of organizations. You can't just say you get 20% and an account to Pluralsight and assume that's going to be a success. You could also say, well, we're just going to hire the best people. Look, you're probably all wonderful people. Every organization out there is saying we hire the best and the brightest. So either you're better than everybody else at hiring, or you're competing for the same pool, or you're just saying things that just statistically speaking can't be true. If everybody is only hiring the best, that means only one person is getting the best and not every single company that's hiring. So we can't just assume hiring is the way to solve it, and we can't assume that just sending people off to learn on their free time is going to solve problems. So your organizations need to solve this problem. You can do this. You need to have some kind of context and idea and how to approach it. There are some ideas here that need to be considered. So for learning to happen, for people and organizations to be learning organizations, these are the four patterns that I've seen necessary. There's a fifth, and kind of a heads up there. We'll talk about a fifth in a little bit, but organizations need to have repetition in their learning. It needs to be fostered through experimentation. Learning needs to be a continual thing inside of organizations. And most importantly, learning needs to have context and experience. And that's what starts making this learning experience rich for organizations. So why repetition? So this should be obvious for a lot of us. The concept should be obvious. This gentleman wasn't obvious by all means to me. This gentleman, Hermann Ebbinghaus, late 1800s, he created this thing called the forgetting curve. And it's really just about if we're not using the things we learn, we tend to forget them, right? And so I think we all can relate to that. If we learn something on Monday and the next week, if we haven't tried it, we tend to forget about it. But if you think about that, in a lot of ways that organizations approach learning is through a classroom style learning. Go to a class, go to a conference, learn something for a couple of days, and then maybe if you're lucky, when you get to it, you might get to use it in a few weeks or a few months. It's kind of like learning just in case. It's a style of learning, right? We're going to learn these ideas just in case we need them in the future or when we think we might want to use them. We're kind of creating an inventory of possible knowledge with the thought that that inventory of knowledge never expires. But what Ebbinghaus created was this very simple graph. If you learn something at day 0 and you never use it over the course of 6 days, your retention of it deteriorates. If you use it shortly thereafter, the retention is longer. If you're continuously using it, the retention is better, right? And so we have to embrace that type of learning where we learn small things and we immediately apply them and we continuously apply them and we continuously grow those ideas. To be able to do this, you have to have an environment and an organization that allows that type of situation. This idea that we're going to experiment and learn continuously. You also need to have this type of situation. You can't be an organization where learning outlier. Many organizations I speak with talk about they already are a learning organization because they allocate 20% of their budget to learning for everybody. And what that usually means, and it meant to me when I was working at various organizations, was, okay, I have 2 weeks of training I get to do this year. Well, I can't do it in January and February because we're busy starting new projects. I'll probably get a couple days in March. I can't do anything probably then until after the summer. And then at the end of the year, we have to use it up. So let's make sure I get my rest of my training in. And so, look, neuroscience tells you that that's business as usual, but it's just simple math. Statistically speaking, if 95% of your time is operating one way, you can't say that the 5% is the norm. And so if you want to be a learning organization, it can't be an outlier. It can't be a special thing. It has to be what you do all the time. It needs to be the way we work. And this last idea here for you, this idea of context and experience based. This is a picture of my arm. Like it's this arm. There you go. The story here is I have tattoos, and I asked my tattoo artist. I said, how did you get started doing tattoos? I hope your answer is I was good at art, and so I decided to make it permanent on people. And he goes, no, that would be silly. That would be dangerous. He said he had to practice a lot. And he had to practice with different types of materials, and he had to practice, with like oranges and grapefruits to see how the ink went into different types of textures. He had to practice a lot because he couldn't just ask somebody how to do a tattoo and then do a tattoo. How does this affect our world? In a lot of organizations, we assume that by writing things down, we documented how to deploy to Kubernetes. We documented AWS practices and policies and VPCs. And therefore, since we documented it, we're done. That's not the case. It turns out for people to learn these things, they need to experience it. They need context. They need to experience it in their domain and how it works. And so that's why this idea of instruction in sandboxes isn't very effective. If my tattoo artist told me that I'm really good at tattooing because I read it from SharePoint or a wiki, I probably wouldn't want to get that tattoo. I want my tattoo artist to have experience and you all work in complex domains, and so you need to have experience learning. So again, bringing it all back, these things are fundamentally necessary for an organization. Repetition of learning, experimentation, learning as a continual space, context and experience, and lastly, this idea of double loop learning. But I'll talk more about that in a little bit. So hopefully by this point in time, you'll realize we can't confuse certifications with learning. Certifications have their purpose. I'm not here to say certifications are evil. Just realize that in our domain, we need more. I want to explain to you this idea that a lot of organizations have been doing, and you can by all means do on your own. This is just one possible way to start to address those gaps. This picture is just kind of what this experience looks like when we were more in a more physical space. This idea was that whole teams would come together, and they would work with somebody that understood a lot of practices, but they would learn while they were building their product, and they would learn across the whole value stream. So the whole idea, and it probably seems obvious and intuitive, is just that learn while doing your work. Create a space that teams are safe to experiment in. There's no sandboxes. It's the real constraints of the organization, but they're doing their work while they learn and immediately apply new practices. I'll talk more in a second here about how that works and why it works. But this is what it looks like in a physical space. In a virtual space, it kind of looks like this. It's a lot of people in a Zoom, but they're learning while they build their product, and they're learning together. This idea, by all means, isn't new. Emily Bache, who I believe is from maybe not your area, but I know she's from the Eastern European space. She wrote this book a while ago, the Coding Dojo Handbook. She has some new books on the Salmon Method, those kinds of things. Fundamentally, it's the same idea. We need to have time to do deliberate practice over a long period of time to get expertise. For you all to get better and become experts at building and delivering good products, you need deliberate practice over time, right? So, but you need to do it while you're building your product, so it has context. That's one of the things that a lot of these organizations that are building up these ideas, these doing, is they're saying teams are going to come together and they're going to learn new practices. New practices could be things like automated deployment, automated rollbacks, test-driven development, product discovery, monitoring, anything it could be. But they're learning these new practices while doing their actual product development. So like they're doing it within the constraints of the organization. There is no sandbox. You also have the risk of doing things wrong. But if you want to be a learning organization, you have to say it's okay to do things wrong. And teams are, of course, learning across this whole value stream. It's the whole team together, not just the engineers, and they're learning how to build a whole product together. They're doing this in small fashions, and this isn't just like some kind of agile thing. This is actually building products, not just talking about stand-ups. Why I think this is powerful and what I've seen is, I showed you that kind of early on value stream around, kind of 4 areas. But here's how it actually plays out, is that skills are actually complementary. The practices you do actually influence each other. And so if you want to get good at infrastructure as code, it's nice to understand microservices and how they're being deployed and when they're important so you can monitor things in context. And to do microservices as well, it turns out it's pretty important to understand things like domain-driven design. And to actually do domain-driven design well, it's interesting and it's helpful to understand the thing that you're building and how it's being used and all those kind of product-y type of things. So all of these skills interweave with each other, but if we were to take them in isolation, we would lose the opportunity to see how they all benefit each other. And we would be, it'd be at a detriment to the whole that we'd be optimizing apart. So teams need to learn together. Some ideas of how this is played out with other teams. You can see a team on top that was doing new product development and a team on the bottom that was doing cloud migration work. The takeaway here isn't that there's a lot of cool topics. The takeaway is that the team was continuously building context and concepts and continuously practicing these ideas over and over and seeing how the practices worked and supported each other. And it was just a fundamentally different thing. And they did this while building or delivering their need. They did this while building their product. They did this while delivering their thing to the cloud. So in the product space, they might have learned things early on around how do we figure out the right thing to build. They might then choose one API to design. They build the service. They do it in a test first way. They create the gateway. They automate deployment, and they start slowly learning things. These aren't just the things to do. This isn't the backlog and the checklist. That's kind of nonsense. These are the things that they need to learn. And so they slow down, and they might do it a few different ways because the first way they did it might not have been the best way. Or maybe it was the best way, but you can't say it's the best way if you haven't tried other ways. And so teams will try things a few times, but they learn a lot of things in the context of building things. Just real quick kind of context for you here. When teams are doing these and they're looking to learn first, it's different. And so I just want to make sure this doesn't come across as an agile thing, because I don't think it's an agile thing. When teams are focused on learning, they're talking about, instead of talking about what did you do, what are you going to do, what's stopping you, blah, 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 impediments and this and that. Instead of talking about that, they're talking about what are we learning, and has what we've learned changed what we think we need to do. In a complex world that we live in, this idea that we know for certain upfront what we need to do isn't always true. A good friend, Woody Zuhl, told me, or a nice statement he would say is, a lot of times it is in doing the work that we discover the work to do. So instead of applying certainty, what did we do? What are we going to do? Let's talk about what we learned. And based upon what we learned, what needs to change? Instead of talking about here's the status of what we built, let's talk about how we think the thing is that we built so far is helping people, and is it solving the problem? So it's kind of context there that is less about certainty and more about embracing complex environments and learning in complex environments. And so when organizations do this, they start to focus more on the learning and less on the status. And it's just a better environment for people as well as for organizations to be in. When this is rolled out, nice things happen. People help teams. Teams, if they need to learn and they want to learn new practices, there's somebody there that can help teach them. Teach them in the moment that they need it. We're not teaching them just in case. Nobody needs to know a unit test for how to add 2 and 2. But people need to know, I have this new piece of work and there's this existing code. How could I interject a test that's interesting and helpful? And so you can't predict when that's going to happen, but people need to be there to help the team when they're ready to do it. So we have people helping teams. We have teams that start to help teams. And once you start getting this going and the language changes and it's less about the certainty and more about the learning, all of a sudden learning becomes a given. The culture starts to change and everybody's talking about the things they're learning and how that learning is influencing them. And it's no longer about, I need to go to AWS training for 2 days. It's about, here's how I think this aspect of AWS, here's how I think auto-scaling might help us do this, and here's what I want to learn that's going to help us get there. And everything becomes contextual and rich. And here's the fun part. As soon as this starts to happen and teams start learning things, organizations start to learn things, meaning that a lot of things that are holding teams back from being successful and having fun and just, kind of really embracing the things that they can deliver and being creative and innovative, a lot of times it's the organization holding back the team. And so as soon as teams start learning things, the organization starts to see data and patterns evolving. And then the organization starts to learn about what they need to do to help teams. And it becomes this double loop learning. So again, that's a power that happens as a byproduct of embracing learning inside your organizations. So just a quick recap here for you. The things that learning organizations need: repetition. They need to be safe to experiment. The language needs to focus on learning and less around certainty. It needs to be continual. It's not just about you need to learn just in case. It's about we're always learning and we're always thinking about what's learning. Learning needs to be in context. It needs to be relevant to the things you're working on within the constraints of your organization. Sandboxes are nice, but sandboxes aren't real, right? So if your VPCs and your network rules are all different, Learning learning with none of those in place isn't necessarily helping you. We need to experience it. We need to do things. We can't just listen to somebody tell us about how it's supposed to work. We can't just read the documentation on SharePoint or Confluence around how somebody thinks they did it 3 years ago. We actually have to experience it and make it true for ourselves. And then the organization needs to learn. The organization needs to learn how to help teams learn more. What I know to be true. Simple kind of reflections for you all. Always start with outcomes. I bring this up. It's good to learn things. It's much more impactful when you can tie the things you learn to an outcome. If we learn how to do this well, it saves money. It makes this experience better. And so it's not just learning for learning's sake, which has its point, but it's learning for a purpose. And then you start getting people excited about things and people feel connected to the learning. People want to feel connected to their work. Allow them and help them see that path. Let's not confuse this idea of failing fast with learning. Failing fast is a popular thing right now, right? Let's fail fast, let's fail fast, let's fail fast. If I continuously drove my bike into a wall to see if the wall was still hard, that would be silly. I'd be failing really fast. I could hit that wall really fast every day, and I'd be like, yeah, that wall's still there. That's just ridiculous. So don't confuse failing fast with actually learning something. To actually learn something, you have to have a purpose and a context of why you want to learn something. You can't just randomly do things. It doesn't make sense. So have intention with what you're learning. Knowledge is not a thing. Let me repeat that for you. Knowledge is not a thing. I can't take my knowledge. I can't pour my knowledge into this coffee cup and then hand it to you and you drink it and now you have the knowledge. This language around transferring knowledge or knowledge management is silly for the most part, because knowledge is a personal creation. It's something that people need to do for themselves. They need to create their own knowledge and their own connectivity to how it works in their world. So this idea that I can give you knowledge isn't even something that can happen. I can give you a car, I can give you coffee, I can't give you knowledge. You can create knowledge. So the best thing we can do inside of our organization is to have conditions that allow and support knowledge creation to happen. That means, less pointing to documents and less saying, go read the document, and more experiencing with people. And last here, be intentional with what's tacit versus explicit. Things that are explicit, feel free to write them down. Just realize that we're in a complex world, and a lot of things we do can't be written down. And somebody can't just read them and have understanding. We need to connect with people. We need to have environments where we can share things together. A quick closing thought for you all. This idea and this practice around organizations embracing learning, it is happening. This picture was from 2019. At that time, there was, I think, 35 companies, major companies that were doing this for their organizations, talking about how do we get better at creating these learning environments. They call it the Dojo Consortium. I understand the company name is similar. That's more circumstance than it is anything else. This is an independent group of organizations that are doing this inside their groups to help people learn and truly become learning organizations. I think it was 35 companies a few years back. I think at my last count, it was well over 50. And they're all doing this. It's not to say they're all wildly successful, but they're learning how to become learning organizations. Kent Beck is another one of the people I look up to. This idea of immersive learning was something that he wanted in the early XP days. This idea that we learn together. So he was excited to see these things coming back. So look, if you don't like me, Kent's a pretty smart guy. I would trust Kent. Embrace learning, continuously experiment, continuously learn, continuously evolve. Don't worry about the transformation, worry about the learning, worry about the journey, worry about the evolution. Create environments that allow people to continuously learn and experiment and connect with each other, and you'll be in a great space. A Deming fan. The greatest waste in America, and of course he said this for America, but it's obviously a global thing, is really the failure for organizations to not use the abilities of it to hold them back. Your organizations all have wonderful people. Allow them to be wonderful. Create the environments for them to be successful. Embrace learning, embrace continuous learning, make it a part of your DNA, and wonderful things will happen. That's what I got. You all can do it on your own. Start there. Use that repetition and contexts and safe spaces for teams to learn, and you'll get to good spots. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for that. I'm almost a little bit stunned right now because there was so much information that you sort of whipped through in such a short period of time, and a lot of it really relevant to me right now. Developing tools and thinking about documentation and how to onboard people. So, just on a personal level, I feel like I'm going to have to go back and watch this talk again. So thank you so much for sharing that, for sharing from your experience, for taking the time out to try to get us up to speed at least a little bit on some of these topics. So we have a couple of questions that are coming in. And one of the questions, this is a DevOps Days theme, so I'll throw it at you. As I like to ask people what their top 3 books are. So we already got one from you. Can you recommend 2 more books? It doesn't have to be related to this, but 2 more books that we should be reading to kind of allow us to level up our organization or ourselves.
A wonderful book, and it's a very hard read, at least it was for me, is the Principles of Product Development Flow by Don Reinertsen. If that hasn't already come up already, that's a book that's, I think, 10 or 12 years that I continuously refer back to, talking about visualizing cues and just kind of measuring economic impacts of decisions. A lot of that talks about siloed knowledge and siloed information and managing the flow of information. So again, that product Principles of Product Development Flow from Reinertsen is an amazing book. If I had to pick one more, I don't know. There's so many other ones that jump out at me. The Toyota Way, Essential Deming is a great one. Understanding Complexity and Managing Complexity by Dan Wheeler is a fabulous book.
That's a classic.
I'm sorry. I get too wrapped up in books here. Yeah. They're all wonderful books. Be diverse, and you'll never know what you learn until you go wide. So go wide with your readings.
For sure. So a couple other questions. Well, less of a question, more of a comment. A lot of people are thanking you for a great talk, so I just wanted to pass that along from the audience. Next, a question here from Jude. He asks, how do I maintain the balance of continuous learning and just straight up career pursuit?
Oh, I honestly don't know if I've ever been asked that question. So that's an interesting question. I mean, so I like to think learning is, to balance it with your career progression is always learning in context. And so whenever people are looking for career progression, at least for me, I'm always looking at the stories people tell me and how the things learning helped them. And so if you go wide with a lot of learnings, but you can't tie it to how it helps something, you might be going too wide. On the flip side, if you might not know where you're going until you read some things. Fully acknowledge I'm not giving you a good answer here. Just I guess my gut is, the closer you can tie the things you're learning to problems being solved without being too deep into things, that finds like the balance, but that's going to be a personal decision for everybody.
That actually ties into some of the roundtable we were doing yesterday, which was around a little bit about career development, how to become a senior engineer or a staff engineer or something like that. And it was about getting out of your comfort zone and starting to become transversed, starting to ask questions about how we can add value in other domains. And I really feel like my gut instinct here is that this concept of continuous learning, this concept of using experience as a guide is fundamental to that journey. Am I off the mark here?
I think you're spot on. I can tell you a good friend of mine. He started off. This is 6 or 7 years ago. He was an amazing infrastructure automation engineer. The things he did with Puppet were amazing. We started talking, and then he started getting interested in understanding more about kind of more experiences. And so he started going, kind of wider in that value stream. He started understanding more about how to build things, and he understood about why to build things. And he got to a point, again, it was his own interest, that all of a sudden he could tie the why he was making decisions in infrastructure to the business need. And it was very enriching for him, but it also made him highly more valuable. All of a sudden, he was the person that everybody wanted to talk to when they were starting up new initiatives, right? And so that getting out of your comfort zone, he didn't like talking to customers at first. He didn't want to understand why they wanted things a certain way. He just wanted to build servers because they didn't talk back. But as soon as he went wider and got out of his comfort zone, it became interesting for him and rewarding for him, and of course, financially rewarding for him.
Yeah, no, that all lines up. And if I may be so bold, everything you were talking about here, it touches on a lot of different things, and it seems like a really good fit for DevOps, right? When we talk about breaking down silos, when we talk about the virtuous cycle of feedback, we talk about tightening those loops, this idea of culture and automation and measurement and sharing, it plays really well into what you've presented here. And I'm really shocked that this is the first time I've heard of this in the 10 plus years that I've been involved in DevOps, because it seems like it's such a natural fit. What are some other resources maybe that are more strictly maybe related to DevOps that people from an engineering context could go to learn more about this?
The DevOps handbook, if it gives you kind of context, the DevOps handbooks, I think that's where Gene Kim talks about the 3 ways, and the third way was around continuous learning in that space. So the DevOps handbook actually walks you through examples with this. The example that he used was actually the first example I was in when we were actually building these ideas up. So the DevOps handbook is great. Even some of those other IT Revolution books, tie into these concepts pretty well. I know Gene talks about, again, it's maybe less DevOpsy, but he talks about theory of constraints. The name of the book, the author is slipping me here, but that's a wonderful book because that really ties into some of these concepts as well. But DevOps handbook's a wonderful place to start.
Excellent. Well, we'll leave it on that bombshell. This is the sort of thing I feel like we could just go off for the next couple of hours on, frankly, but we have a lot of more great content lined up. So I would like to thank Joel for taking the time out to share some knowledge with us, share some experience with us, and hopefully spark some important conversations in our audience at home. Thank you so much, Joel, for sharing your time with us.
Thank you for having me.